Hi folks, it's John. I'm out in the shop today cutting some plugs. What might be interesting about these plugs is the wood. It's called cambia, which is a trade name for thermally modified poplar. That is poplar that's been heated, and that's why it's this color. It's kind of been a little bit of a challenge getting this set up to cut this because the first few plugs that I cut broke straight off in the bit, and it was evident things weren't going to go well. I started on a scrap piece and found that it did not like the speed I was spinning this. So usually I'm running these at about 800 to 1,000 RPM, and what I found out is I needed to back it down to about 500. Usually if you use a plug cutter, you've broken a plug off in the cutter and you have to pry it out, which is kind of a nuisance, and you ruin the piece in the process. Usually I just leave my drill press at a constant speed, and if things aren't going well, I'll slow down my feed or speed up my feed. That is how fast I'm running the press down into the workpiece. But yeah, for this I was kind of surprised. I really had to back off on my speed and take light cuts to get this to work. So let's cut a few on the other end, and I'll show you kind of the process of what I'm doing here, and eventually I hope to get to show you the project that we're working on. And that might seem simple enough, but getting to this point was the struggle. You'll notice on these, maybe you can see just a little bit of a chamfer on the tip of those plugs. That's what I'm aiming for when I'm setting my initial depth stop on the press. So I really like to cut this on a drill press where you can control what you're doing. You can, in a pinch, do this by hand, but you just don't get the repeatable results. And some of these, you can see, when I got close, a lot of woods will break out like this. But this stuff, as we're cutting it, it's a little bit fragile. And sometimes you can feel as you're kind of, running that plug cutter into the wood, you can almost feel when a piece is going to pop on you or break off and plug up. So it's it's a mundane task, but it can be a little bit stressful because none of us really want to break those off and pry the thing out and keep cutting, cut twice as many holes as you actually need to. So I'm going to keep working on this. If you watch this in real time, what I'd probably do is cut 10-12 plugs and then actually take a little bit of a break, let the tooling cool off a little bit, and then jump right back into it. But I'm just gonna leave the camera running, cut some plugs, take a break, come back, cut them, and then we'll get to what they're for. There, we finally had one. You can almost feel as you were plunging down in there, you can just feel it start to crack. And I want to make sure I have all of that cleaned out of there. That last one I got away with it. I could feel and hear the thing crack, so I think with just a little pressure it'd break off. Now, we had a broken one off here, we had one break off here, we had this starting to crack. A lot of people might look and say, oh, this is a bad spot in the wood. What probably is happening, and I really can't touch this bit for too long, is after I've done all of these, it's heated up to the point where it's starting to affect how it's cutting, and that's where you're starting to get them breaking off on you. So here I was able to do all of these. They started breaking off. When I started on this side, I was able to do all of these before it started to break off. So I think there is something to letting it cool down. But again, setting this up, if you're having problems getting this to cut cleanly, the first thing to go after is the speed that your drill is spinning at. So you might have to speed it up, you might have to slow it down. After that, it's feed rate. Am I feeding too fast? Am I feeding too slow? Or am I kind of finding that nice middle ground where the tooling is actually doing the cutting? And I think a lot of times it's getting that sawdust clogging in there too. Kind of clogs up the works and breaks it off. So next step is we have to separate these from the board.
We talked a little bit about how to cut plugs. I want to talk a little bit about how we install plugs. First of all, you're going to need a bit like this, which basically is a counterbore, countersink bit. These are relatively inexpensive, and if we're doing a project, make sure that it's sharp, because if it's not, it's going to tear out around the hole, and when you put your plug in, it's going to leave a reveal around that. It won't be able to hide that plug as well as you probably should. So make sure this is sharp. Pretty easy. I'm just adding a little glue to a couple sides of these counterbores, and you want to make sure you try to match up the grain direction with the grain direction of the wood, and we're simply just going to tap that in. Don't overhit it, because you could smash that and fracture the wood grain. Another thing, when I'm doing this little operation, some people might have the tendency to do one thing and then move on to the next. And what I mean by that is they add all the plugs, then go back and flush cut them. I tell you what, I like to do a few at a time. I'm not necessarily waiting for that glue to dry. That plug's not coming out of there when I'm cutting this off, but I am going to cut it off with a flush cut saw. And a flush cut saw, basically, if you don't know what that is just the teeth have no set, or relatively no set, so when I'm rubbing it across this board flat, it's not scratching the board. They don't cut very aggressively. They do a nice job. And you notice I'm just holding my hand on there just to keep that saw flush. Nice light strokes. Okay, so I cut that one off perfectly flat, and the reason why I said not to go ahead and glue them all in and let that glue set up is, let's just say, and maybe this has never happened to any of you, but it's happened to me, where that actually breaks off below the surface. Now this plug is going to be a problem. And how are you going to get that off if the glue is already dried? If the glue's not dried, what I'm doing is installing just a regular 3/4 inch screw in the middle of that plug, and I'm just driving it down. Eventually it's going to hit that screw head in the bottom, and it's going to pull your plug out. If you wait for that glue to completely dry, that's not going to come out, and I have very little material left in there to have to put a new plug in. So it's a great way of extracting those plugs, but do it when the glue is not set up. After you get them installed, a quick little sand over the top, and you've got perfect plugs.